Welcome, everyone, to Saddle Road's first Sunday reading for January 2025. Just for those of you that may not know, Saddle Road Press is a micro press focusing on poetry, literary fiction, literary memoir, and hybrid work. We started publishing in 2011 in Hilo, Hawaii. Saddle Road refers to the high plateau that crosses the Big Island between two 14,000-foot mountains, Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. Since then, we've published about 65 books, and in 2020, we moved to Ithaca, New York, right in the middle of the pandemic. This reading series features Saddle Road authors and is hosted by two beloved poets, Philip Terman, author of My Blossoming Everything and many other marvelous books, and Keith Walker, author of the wonderful All That Names Us. Today, I am delighted to introduce two of my favorite poets to the Saddle Road reading series, Maria Williams and Jessamyn Smyth. Maria Williams is the author of White Doe and the chapbook A Love Letter to Say There Is No Love. She is a Pushcart nominee and has been awarded residencies and fellowships from Gentel, PEN America, the Vermont Studio Center, A Room of One's Own, and the Summer Literary Seminars. An adoptee and a single mother, Maria often writes about belonging, abandonment, family, and relationships. She hails from the hills of Western Massachusetts. And at this moment, she is suffering from a very bad case of this terrible flu that's going around. So don't talk
Yeah.
too much. In White Doe, winner of the Verse Daily Prize, the speaker transmutes grief and loss into pure presence as she bears witness to her father's slow descent into dementia and death. Through the landscape of dementia, a fragmented, snowy tundra, she and her father experience the fracturing of language and family, entering into a world of eternal fragments, moments of awareness, and eventually light itself. Jessamyn Smyth is the author of The Inugami Mochi and Gilgamesh Wilderness from Saddle Road Press, as well as the poetry chapbook Kitsune, the story collection Cohen Garden, and the memoir Skaha. A More Perfect Union from the Inugami Mochi was selected for Best American Short Stories in 2006. Her poetry and prose have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. She is a recipient of fellowships, scholarships, and grants from the Robert Francis Foundation, Bread Loaf, and many others. Jessamyn was the founding editor-in-chief at Tupelo Quarterly. Excuse me, I had to let somebody in. And founder-director of the Quest Writers Conference. She has taught interdisciplinary humanities and writing at Bard College, Holyoke, Quest University, Canada, Middlebury College, and elsewhere, and now teaches public health communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst while she builds a PhD in medical humanities. In Gilgamesh Wilderness, Jessamyn uses the architecture of the ancient story of Gilgamesh and his human-animal beloved Enkidu to explore the devastation and madness of grief. What happens to the witch when her familiar, her beloved, her other self dies? In Gilgamesh Wilderness, Jessamyn creates a modern epic in response to the radical, central question of our existence. How do we go on? Heart open in the presence of death. I'm going to turn this over to the two of you.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me here and for choosing this book and being my publisher. It has been such a pleasure to work with you. And I don't think that this book would be the book that it is without you and your incredible editing skills and all that. So I just want to say thank you. So I'm going to read um, the first poem or two to start, and I'll just talk a little bit about these poems. As she said, the book is following a daughter and her father as he travels through dementia. Um, and so there's a lot of back and forth and different sections and stuff like that. But this first poem called The Doe sort of sets us all up. And this poem is a longer poem and it's in sections, but it's not numbered. So I'm just going to like pause a little bit and then you'll know that the next section is coming. Okay, so I'll just begin. The Doe. Weather. On the other side of the glass. A meat truck pushes through it on the road. Thick flakes stick to telephone wires. Would you like a cup of coffee? Milk, you say, a bowl. White dough-like glass. White dough among the evergreens. White dough beside the shed, beside the house. White dough under the covers, hooves sticking out. We sit sipping beside the window, put dishes in the sink, sigh over the lip of the drain. I am alone, Dad. I am in mourn and quiet. Between us, a small chorus of trees. You start crying like the birds. You were crying yesterday. There, the common room. This, the apostrophe. In which hand do I hold the feathers? In what heart the string? It is not enough to witness you forgetting. Coyotes, Dad, coyotes. Here is a red coat and a pocket full of seed. Here are 2 sticks for making fire. I wish I could give you antlers or sharper teeth. Crusted top, crystal loam, angry wind, snow. How will I know you are with me? North, you say. You lean over the lip of it. North. Do you remember my name? Yes, but it's hiding. Your name is my name hiding. White doe alone. White doe crossing the rabbit tracks. White disappears in the clouds. Who are we now? You shout toward the window. 1, let's count the hoof prints in the snow. 2, the fire. 3, I will go foraging and you will throw seed. 4, your hands a small steeple. What about the people with the pistols, you cry? No, I say, ghost. We hear a crack in the field. Birds rush from their branches. 5, grab the hymnal. 6, the bowl. I bought you a coat. I wrote your name in the lining. There goes a rabbit under a bush, and the urge to crack its skull and drink. The house, its windows out, slow churning of the cistern. I am pretending to be a wolf, you a fish, almost dead and out of water. Our snowsuits chafe the sky. The geese have gone worry, you say. Your nose drips. White doe, her family. White, her glass eye. Dad, I'm hungry. A rabbit is everything, and there it goes. Quiet, and a deer treads outside our window. This small church, like when I made Aggie, peering over the edge of each letter into the dark folds of a drift. I turn on the light. Outside, the glowing windows say, "Here is your salvation to whomever passes." We reach out our hands over the dull edge of formica, the bruised skin of milk. Soon the child in each of us will be fully wept. and you begin to sing, bring me back as a small bird. Then you look at me the way you look through snow, as if I could walk into the storm, disappear. Morning, the electricity's out. What's in the field? What's in the ever folding snow mounds? A plow scrapes the street. Smoke rises into sky. Why are the birds here? Why don't they fly? Dad, look, feathers glistening in the drive. The doe, her carpet unrolled. Squirrels and other creatures in the yard. You run for your slippers, say milk, but we're out. Say the corn cobs are in the garage. I want you to wait, want to say coat, but the heaters are hissing. A procession begun. Coffee? No. White doe comes and nuzzles your cheek. White her wet nose. White and you laughing. Thank you. So that's the first sort of poem that sets us up for maybe a little story about this family and how they move through dementia together. I don't know. I don't know how long that took me to read, but I could read one more and then maybe turn it over. Does that work? Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is just more of a dementia poem. It's called Boat. If dementia were a boat, it would be the moon. If a moon, a submarine. No particular orbit, perpetual night, her flying objects, space trash, black flies. A child paddling without a sea, his mother, whose mother, lady in the ink. No one to whisper, get up, it's late, time for bed. It's good to see you, moon. Come sit by the portal, wipe your spoon, enjoy a parade of muzak, soft foods, barbed sleep. Dementia would be a man floating past a spaceship window, a cow with its head caught in the lake, my father essaying through a field against frozen stalks of rain, a property change, the air into atmosphere, shit on the wall. He keeps putting his hands in his pants and smearing feces on the flowered paper, to hieroglyphs, a new language from a black cave. Bats, 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 bats fly out his mouth by the thousands. I'll stop there. Thank you guys. Thanks.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Jessamyn, yeah, hi.
Hello. Please forgive me, everybody. I had an electricity disaster and had to grab my computer and bolt for a different house. I'm so sorry to be coming in late, but I'm delighted to be
Like
with
that.
you.
Yeah, yes. Well, please go ahead. I mean, either if you want to talk about, I wanted to show actually both of you, you share something that and I wanted to show this in White Doe, which is, this kind of use of white space as things fall apart. And Jessamyn, you do this also, as you can see. So that's one of the things that interests me in both of your work is the way you have used silent, what to me represents silence, because I'm hearing the poems. So there are these long times of silence. And to represent well, in dementia, the blanking out of dementia, but other kinds of, I mean, in your case, Jessamyn, there are a number of things that are represented that way, but one of the things is the erasure of time. Um, anyway, I'll let you go ahead and I won't talk anymore here.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ruth, and it's wonderful to see your face. And thank you to everybody who's here at the readings. And I was really struck too by the resonances between what I was trying to do in my book and what I found in Maria's pages, which are just so beautiful. And as Ruth said, I think, she's using that white space and the caesuras and the diction, the verbing of nouns and the syntax, in this way that creates something of the experience of grieving and also of dementia itself. And certainly that's what I was trying to do in my book as well. And then, of course, the other thing I was trying to do in my book was model it on the tablets of the ancient epic of Gilgamesh. And many of those tablets have been damaged, as many of you probably know. And so they are literally flaked and chipped. And so lines are missing from the original epic, and we don't know what was there in many cases. In some, we've figured it out from other tablets, but in most, we just don't know. And I find those caesuras interesting personally and poetically because they allow me to enter into the text and force me to engage in an active way and to try to feel my way through what may have happened in those caesuras. And hopefully in my book they create something similar. So Ruth, would you still like me to read a little bit about the book so that people have a sense of it, or should we just jump into the unfamiliar?
Um, I don't know what I really don't know. I don't know if the people here have seen the book. So maybe if you could,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe it would help people
sure.
get a feel for what it is.
So first of all, yeah, this is the beautiful cover. And Maria and I doing this cool thing with white space and diction and odd spacing, of course, made Don Mitchell's life an absolute nightmare in terms of trying to typeset these books and, get them printed the way we envisioned. But also, the cover of this book is a photograph of Don's that I believe he took from a helicopter over a lava flow in Hawaii. And it felt like the sort of red slash of grief, but also of hot life through death. And so I asked him if I could use it, and he kindly said yes. And I'll read you just a little bit because the book is a little bit complex in structure. This might orient you briefly. The text that Ruth asked me to share is from the description of the book, and it says, "In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the mad and superhuman king can only be softened and made wise through traumatic loss of his beloved, full confrontation with mortality, and finally absolute humbling. The root of the word humble does not come from humiliation. It comes from humus, that fertile, dark, nutrient-rich layer of soil comprised of all that has gone before and sustaining all that lives now. But what does grief powerful enough to actually humble truly entail? And how is it that we must each walk Gilgamesh's quest to the land of faraway? In A God in the House, poets talk about faith. Greg Orr shares a line from Sappho, and he writes, "The beloved calls us out into connection with the world, into reciprocal relation with the world." Sappho has a poem, Fragment 16, in which she has a line, "Whatever one loves most is most beautiful." The recognition and acknowledgement of the beloved floods the individual life with meaning. Notice Sappho says, whatever. She doesn't limit it to being a person, and I think that's crucial. The greatest insights into what being human means sometimes come through the most ancient stories and their animal and wild archetypes. What happens when the beloved is not human, but instead Enkidu, panther of the wilderness, the wild creature made by the gods to save Gilgamesh from his own corruption? What happens when the beloved is Humbaba's forest in a literally burning world? What happens when the beloved is of a species other than ours, co-evolved with humans for more than potentially 80,000 years, to access our love directly, yet constrained to painfully short lifespans? And of course, I'm talking about dogs here. What happens when the loss of humans is not as bad? What happens to the witch when her familiar, her reciprocal relationship with the world dies? Gilgamesh Wilderness uses the architecture of the ancient Near Eastern epic as a doorway into one particular and unique death, as all deaths are unique and particular. Through that door, and the mad walk west to kill death itself rather than grieve or die again. A meditation, eulogy, elegy, and humbling emerge in answer to the central question posed by this great epic. How do we go on, hearts open, in the presence of mortality? And one other note about it, I've been teaching the Epic of Gilgamesh and loving it with a mad passion myself since I was very early in my teaching career. So many, a couple of decades now of immersion in this beautiful text, and it changes every time I read it. It's one of those. So I really invite you to engage that old story. Um, so this is the preface to the book. Unfamiliared. We don't live anymore in the time when there's that woman who lives way up on the mountain in that crazy ramshackle house made of equal parts barn board and found objects, surrounded by broken down stuff and overgrown wildflowers. The woman who has an animal that is of her and with her and for her and from her, but even more clearly and unnervingly not of human origin at all. And she is of it, with it, for it, and from it. We don't live in that time anymore, and so when we meet her and her familiar, we both recognize her and cannot. She isn't always a crone, though she might be, and eventually will be. She has high-speed internet run up the side of that mountain in fiber optic cables. She works jobs that do not require her to speak of teams or corporate family. She buys in bulk, buying time during which she does not have to come down. Her animal is always with her, and humans always know that to her they are not as interesting. Only a few of them don't mind. We know tales of the woman whom no one could marry, and call her a virgin goddess and tell about how she sicked hounds on stalkers at bathing spots. But the woman, she's just as likely as not to come to our beds. It's just that she won't be there in the morning, because we are too loud, too extraneous to cope with when fresh from the liminal, where she is all animal and awash in relief from her human form. And besides, she has to go home and feed her familiar, who wasn't very comfortable on your bed anyway. We know just enough of her still that when we meet her and her animal, we envy this thing we can see and feel but not understand, so we do our best to demolish it, or hunger for it and try to stand close to the heat that it throws, but know always that the flame is not of our own generation, and sooner or later resent it. We do not live in a time when there is that woman, the witch, the shaman, the Inugami Mochi, and her animal with whom she is one being in two bodies. We fear them because if they are not magic or divine, they must be doing something we are not. And so we warp stories to say the Inugami was created by us, by being buried alive or tortured to death, as if bonds of this kind could be forged in a crucible of anything other than unguarded, unequivocal, inhuman love that sooner or later costs everything, but always sooner and during is the key to everything. We do not live anymore in that time. And so when that woman's familiar dies, we do not know how or why it is that she does too. Because after all, when a person dies, it's not something that can happen over and over, daily, hourly, riven minute by minute, and over a human span of decades, is it? unless you're talking myths. It's a final and singular thing, death. We know this. She knows this, the riven one whose grief we can't fathom. After all, she lives there, in both the life and the death, in all times, and that is why she is not of ours, and why she cannot even bleed or eat when the Inugami is gone. Her circulatory system has turned to ash, her organs shut down. That pulsing you see in the inside of her wrist, it's misleading. It's the familiar's heartbeat, not hers. Pounding drums from an echoing cavern deep, deep underground, where Ereshkigal's hooks are in the walls, and there are many wrong turns, and where at the still and dusty center, a single sickly pomegranate tree grows stunted from uneven rocks.
Unbelievable. Such a beautiful poem.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, that poem blows me away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really what I was very interested in when I wrote uh, there are many places in this book where I talk about sort of, well, which parts of this are true? And I say the bears, the fish, the dog, the rain, you know. Um, and the dog of these two books actually was real. And what I was really wanting in my relationship with him was more stories about familiars that were contemporary, and I just couldn't find them. And so I had to write them. And yeah, so I did this one, the Inugami Mochi, which is a short story collection, which was the first thing that Ruth and Don made so beautifully for me. And then Gilgamesh Wilderness was sort of trying to, walk through that gate into what happens afterwards, what happens when the familiar is gone. Oh, Elizabeth McDuffie is in the chat saying, I feel so honored to have met the handsome Gilly. She did. She met him. He went to her parties, and I think he had pie maybe at one of her parties. Anyhow, so that's the prologue of the book. And then what it does is it mirrors the structure, sort of the architecture of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It goes from, madness in the desert, right after the death, to among the scorpion people, under the mountain, the garden of jewels, Siduri, the ferryman, the waters of death, the land of far away, the gate of grief, the great flood, the trial, the waters of life, and then finally coming sort of back full circle to the city of Uruk and coming to some kind of terms with that question, how do we go on? Hearts open in the presence of death. So it was a hell of a thing, and I'll tell you what, it Gilgamesh keeps having to do trials, and he has to sleep. He sleeps for 7 days and 6 nights, and there are all of these sevens and sixes. And I promised Ruth this book in 2 years, I think, after Inagami Mochi, and it took me 7 years and 6 months to write this book. So, yeah, thank you, my friend. Oh, thank you, Michelle Wing. I love your books as well. It's great to have you here. Um, so that one's a little bit of a slow read, and we did the context for it too. Should I read another short one or two? Should we, Maria and I, just start switching back and forth one by one? How would people like to
What
shape
would
this?
you like to do? Do you want to read a couple more? Do you want to start back? Maria, do you want to go back? What would the two of you like?
Well, I feel like I want to read a couple of poems that sort of respond to what you've just read. And they're
Please
short,
do.
and then you can go, um, I have some dog poems, dogs who have died, and other animals who become sacrificed for, I don't know what for exactly, for grief, because of grief, because we're human. Um, And also this, in my poems, because we're dealing with dementia, there is a family dynamic happening where there's a mother character who comes in, and she's sort of she's a harder character to understand. And I think of your woman in the house on the hill, and what she's going through, and it just kind of gave me a little bit more context to some of these mother poems that are in here too. So if others might be able to see some connections, since we're both dealing with grief and dead dogs and things like that. So I'm gonna read this poem called Walk Through. And I also mention, I don't know if you can see this, but Walkthrough is kind of created with a lot of spaces in it too. And in this particular poem, they're about what's missing, like missing pieces. So you'll see like there's just like a space in between a line, and that is like a missing space, and that the character is trying to figure out again like what's in those empty spaces. And this is also a house poem. Okay, Walk Through, it's called. The cups are gone. That missing painting on the wall shines its own sun like dirt. There is the chair he'd been heavy in for days, its back ribs bowing. A house is a chair that holds our weight, a heart that breaks its own caning. Mom says she'll kill me if I come near. She would send letters if she knew how to write. The body, too, is an animal, a small vase, that brass plate someone earned somewhere in a war. I remember Mom burying herself in dead leaves on the lawn, days before she spoke, and then the way a chain saws. Someone is feeding all your missing things into the furnace, the house says. Someone is expecting. I pretend not to hear it. The mind is a creature I can't believe. We had a dog once. Maggots wove a rug of its skin. The problem is being porous, and the house is covered in its own membrane where I've slipped in. I'm rearranging all the furniture in my mind. There is no furniture, but I am moving it. The sill covered in coffee rings and flies. The dog, nobody loved it. The vet said she had worms all through, like a piece of wood. With which hand do I hold the dead? The house never answers. With what shovel? What cup? So we begin under like there's this dog in the house. So the next poem is Burying the Dog. We carried her body as one carries a human body, placed it in the car, drove slowly, excuse me, over blackbirds, cowbirds, grackles. We carried her up a long slope, clumsily, almost unable to reach the hole. It was late, the two of us, shivering. We lifted her in an old blue blanket, 2 corners each, our silhouettes folding and refolding, as if memory meant love. We left her, the maggots knitting her skin by early evening, clicking their sticks they ate and ate. Then we drove back over the birds, as people do, to spend the night in our beds. And then I'm just going to read one more because I'm fascinated now by this idea of like I guess the familiar, I'm still a little bit playing with the idea of what the familiar is as you see it, Jessamyn, but here, this is a poem called My Father is Carcass, My Mother is Fly, and my mother has transformed um, in grief and in dying. And I don't know, it's an interesting idea that um, that's what we have women do. My father is carcass, my mother is fly. See how she hovers over that terrified hole? His mouth, a blazing window, as if all questions are answered by a great blast of sun. See his ribs stretched white and her wet wings shimmering, eyes multiplying the many years. This must be love. How she touches down on his lips and nibbles there. How she lights on his chin and rubs her tiny hands to start a tiny fire. Maybe her heart is in those hands, as it has always been, busy, burning. I admit it is good to see her weightless, finally, winged, forgetting all I have not forgiven yet. Hi, Mom, I whisper into the tomb. See her pause, then a light, land on his eye and pierce the smallest pinpricks into his cornea. See the sun's dark crown. You are both still inside me, she whispers back. This the end and the beginning. His palms are small cups. Come and drink. Thank you. Oh, sorry. But yeah, there's something, I'm seeing some parallels. I don't know if anybody else is seeing them or wants to talk about them. I'm not sure what to say about them exactly, but here we are kind of playing with similar things.
Yeah. Yeah. These poems are just, I said in the chat, they're just so devastating, and they're still catharsis, and they're still healing because they're truthful, and they bear witness in that active sense of actually changing the structure of the universe by telling the truth, and yeah, and that poem, as you were reading it, I didn't catch this when I just read it myself, but as you were reading it, and because of this conversation, I was thinking about, I hope I spelled them right. I have to double check. It's been a while, but there are these two very minor characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and they're flies or demons or spirits or guides or familiars or something. They're these weird creatures that are sort of most closely resembling flies in how they're described. And so of course, but they're important. They play this like really important role. And of course you just made me think of them too.
Awesome.
More resonances. Yeah.
Jessamyn, why don't you read a couple more poems? I'd like to hear some more.
Sure. Sure. Um, I can pull pieces from all over the place in here, and there's sort of one way to do it that gives you a sense of the book, and there's another way to do it that I think I prefer to do today, just because Maria and I are resonating with each other in the way that we are. I think I'll just sort of do that call and response that you just did too. As you were reading, I was thinking about one of mine, Lazarus and Mud Season. Granular now, this ice, this temperature differential, this oblique control. If I had a god, she would be that nervous flicker exploding from the thawing hay and iced crocus. She would be the question, how? Now so granular, the big parts answered, each green blade iced and stymied. If I had a god, he would be the scent of vetiver and campfire, molecular traces in my body, granular now in the icy question why, left hanging in ground-clinging clouds of snowmelt, crocus buds under glass. I dream of stags, vast antlered, inscrutable, the muscled shoulders of percherons. Where am I? The question that changes before it is answered. Some land you occupy, some land occupies you. Eagles and seals duck torrential rain. Witch's hair 30 meters long outlasts all of us. Symbiotic green, our skeletons. It's the salmon bones, you know, that make the trees so big. Calcium, magnesium, oily E, ibuprofen, ubiquitous, and the half-life of flexural, a molecular known, certain as faith. Fire overcomes ice. Ice extinguishes. Where you are depends on where you have been, shot from this field in a panic of flight. Nerve connections gather in low branches of muscle and bone. A waking bear pulls a salmon from the Memquem River, distant. Sucked bones left on an altar of root. This body drifts in uncertain flow. A cottonwood snags, fallen giant, glacier pushed. Herons nest there, sharp-eyed and still. The air pours linden. Pollen makes end papers, chartreuse and brick pools. Ice-sheathed, spring willows try so hard. Nerve connections fire. A peregrine sails fastest creature on earth. To be so fast, aglow with sap. Where are you going? Each next thing, muscle snagged on titanium bone. It still hurts, you know, resurrection, just less than what came before. And then maybe I will read Apex to bring in some of the human voices that enter this. Apex. 6 orcas in Howe Sound, breaching, far enough away to see fins. Come close as dream, I plead, but they do not. This morning I got up, made coffee, and went to the back bedroom to wake you, expecting your lazy morning laugh because I had come to get you, sleeping in, sort of, one eye open, listening, knowing I would come. Enticing, the love. Of course, the bed was empty. You're dead, ash in a box, and the orcas, unheeding, did not bring you back to me, carried in their mouths gently from that world to this, spat upon the shore at my feet, laughing. A man next to me, Squamish, praised recovery. It's good that the life is back in the sound, he said. Yes, I answered, and we watched, pointed, watched, happy. He introduced himself, Larry. I told him my name and we shook hands. Nice to meet you, cuz, he said, and then called me cuz several times, making me one of them, and I was grateful, moved. After a while, he slapped me on the back and wandered home. Others, Squamish in cars, trucks, welcoming the orcas, smiled at me. Larry's approval, a handprint on my back. Breaching. Tears. Gilgamesh, I said, and wept. An orca brought you home. But they didn't. Not today. Only in dream. In life, it was the heron who wanted to get next to me. Look at me, he kept saying. I will bring you close. Look at me, alive, alive, alive. The feathers on his breast angled in the precise arrangement of your ruff.
Amazing. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. Um, Maybe I'll read another two that sort of speak to the human experience on the surface as these underworlds are happening beneath. In the book, the narrator, as I did, goes west. In the book, she explicitly goes goes west to kill death. In the book, it's really pinned to the archetype. In my own life, it was, of course, messier and less clear, but I think essentially that's what I was doing. I had to go to a landscape of no memory, and a place where there was nothing, and start to be able to grieve in a place where I wasn't constantly being re-injured, by memory. And for me, that was a good strategy, actually. It helped me quite a lot to do. But what I did is I'm a classicist, among other things. And so I called it my Iliad in the Wilderness period because I was teaching classics and ancient epics at Quest University in British Columbia on the West Coast. And um, so this poem is called Iliad in the Wilderness. It's not the worst thing, is it? To pretend that if I leave, he'll be there when I return from epic, mad quest. It works in the stories. Retinas purged of his going dark. Visiting the edge of a mountain hanging over Pacific fjord, orcas herding dolphins, herding smelt, sea lions and eagles hovering over the face of the water, the beloved, waiting their turn. I teach the Iliad, and darkness veiled their eyes. Again and again, darkness veils their eyes, and the palm of my left hand holds the beloved's last breath, a burning city. This story is so violent, a student says, appalled by the specificity of bodies in death. Hector, for the moment, I take off my helmet, place it on his head. His eyes fill, so much water. It's such a tender gesture, the student says. That scene on the battlements, his humanity, how it ends. This isn't right. And then the sleep of bronze. Iliad in the wilderness for the third time. All bardic cycles cycle in threes. 6 months gone, and down we drop into the sleep of bronze, night closed on our eyes. A student writes, I finished the Iliad today because there's no way I can keep this up for a week. I see blood when I close my eyes. And crushing empathy drops its wine-dark depths. The eyes, the eyes. It's all that darkness veiling all those eyes. And if I could, I'd crush her to me in some kind of mortality-defying embrace. Gilgamesh at world's end, but not failing this time. Awake, awake, Gilgamesh, for 7 nights and 6 days, and death will die. Instead, loaves of bread made stale by the passage of time, uninhabited by the beloved. Page upon page of blood. Flashes of beauty so fierce. New pages fall into our hands, crisp and blank.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you, Ruth. Maria, shall we call and respond a little more, or?
Sure. Or I was thinking opening up if anybody had questions or thoughts or things that they wanted to ask us.
Yeah.
Yeah, any questions? And unmute yourselves if you would like.
I would like to say something. This has been beautifully difficult for me personally to listen to because I am also dealing with a parent with dementia at the moment. And Jessamyn, I was not familiar with your writing. And the very first piece that you read, I feel like I want to share with every other person that I know. So I guess the question is how you began, how you entered into these difficult topics. big question.
Are you asking both of us or Jessamyn?
I'm asking both of you.
I think, well, for me, my dad was losing his memory slowly. So it was something that I was witnessing over time. And so this is the real story of that is it was winter and I had come home from hanging out at my parents' house and my mother had said, "We finally took your dad to the doctor. He has some kind of dementia." And we had all seen him losing his memory. But my dad was like this brilliant scientist and who had been slowly going silent. And I had a desk overlooking the backyard, and it was just that kind of icy snow outside that hadn't been touched yet. And in that moment, I looked at the icy snow and I was thinking of my father, and then the poems began. And that's just like they helped. It wasn't, I mean, my dad actually passed away maybe 6 years later. Like it took time to the poems were helpful in healing and me processing what he was going through. Um, but it was slow and hard that way. So that's how I entered. So it was like, therapy, but also poetry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was really stunned when I read Maria's book because the one that I'm working on right now is about my mother's death from dementia, so more resonances. And your question, yeah, it's interesting. How does it start? I thought that I think for me the highest bar from anything that I write is if I can say I said what I meant to. Because I'm a perfectionist and I'm never done. There's always more revision that I could do, and I just will, And so if I can reach the point of saying, yeah, I said what I meant to, um, then I've reached that highest bar for myself. And I felt like I did that with the Inugami Mochi, and it was done. But then when this death happened, it was so very not done. And what was happening was this really deep engagement with archetypal cycles and these epics, whether it was, the Iliad or the Odyssey or Gilgamesh or the Descent of Inanna. I had written the Ascent of Inanna while I was in BC, um, and so, where it started for me was actually the first short poem in the book, um, which I'll just read to you very quickly. It's called Landscape with Dead Beloved. Sometimes flame, wildfire, brush, soil itself, even snow, even the ice burned in searing instant. Flesh from bone, bone from coherence, this rounded pile of ash, spinal cord, still articulated. And it was this image that I had that I couldn't shake of this wasted landscape of the entire world that I had loved. And in the heart of it, this pile of ash with this spinal cord still in it. And I wrote that landscape with dead beloved. And then as sometimes happens with me, I just kept going and it became Night Walk with Dead Beloved, a different poem. And then it was Song with Dead Beloved. And then it was Dream with Dead Beloved. And then, it's sort of these dances with the dead beloved. And I realized I was moving in the direction of a book. And so then it became a problem of, well, how do I want to do this so that it's not, and this is the big question, right? About any art that is simultaneously artful genuinely and meant to be a communication to others. And then maybe even if we do our jobs really well, some kind of a tool for others that makes their burdens a little bit lighter or helps them articulate and move through something or whatever gifts, right, that we all get out of the books that we read and the art that we encounter. So then the problem is, how do we universalize through the lens of the deeply particular and those unshared specifics, right? How do we make something so specific that it becomes universal? It's that catch-22 thing. Um and for me it started with the blank with dead beloved poems, and then I moved from there, and I began to realize that what I really wanted to grapple with was that question of the epics. Like how are we supposed to do this? How are we supposed to not shut down and become hardened and defended and cold when loss is so relentless, when mortality is so unbeatable? How are we supposed to do that? How? And so I wrote my way through to that.
One of the things that strikes me about both of these books is that you have, each of you has gone deeper and deeper and deeper until you have grounded in truth, as and the self has, even though the grief is deeply felt and we feel it, nevertheless they are ultimately selfless. They're ultimately talking at a level of universal truth, and that to me is something rare. And it's something, and so there's communicating to others and helping others, which is a lateral kind of movement. And then there's grounding down in. And that is infinitely more useful, at least to me. So both of these books I find um, really beautiful in that way.
What I find is that what they have in common is the strangeness of the familiar. Whereas Jessamyn is the dog, another creature that is not us in a way, and Maria, dementia, a father, strange, something very foreign to many of us. That my mother also passed away from dementia, so I understand this whole thing, and it really affected me. Really wonderful. Both books were wonderful. I also felt, from my own reading perspective and interest in terms of poetry, Maria struck me as being kind of Dickinsonian, and Jessamyn's maybe Whitmanian, because it was, yours was very expansive and brought in, touched so much of both Western with Gilgamesh and Homer, and Japanese and Eastern and archetypal that way. And Maria's very when you mentioned the fly, I thought of a fly buzzed when I died. I mean, I thought of that kind of seclusion in a way that Emily had, and really just facing the kind of unknown and the white deer and the snow, and certain slant of the light, which is happening right now, by the way. And we're out my window, and that whole white doe metaphor and symbol, whatever, was just Dickinson for me in a way, and also the kind of sparseness of the language, especially on those pages, one word at a time. And of course, we know Dickinson was very sparse, and told some things slant-wise. So I really appreciated both books for what they had in common, but also in the different poeticness that they explored to get.
And the two great rivers of American poetry.
Exactly.
Oh.
Thank you. That's really nice. I will say that I live about 20 miles from Emily Dickinson's house.
Ah.
So maybe the landscape that I see out my window every day has
I was
something.
right there. I mean, I visited that area too, and where we are here in Western Pennsylvania, and how much I love Dickinson, as well as Whitman. So, I mean, I just immediately in the first page, I thought, oh, wow. Not
Nice.
that it was, I mean, it was yours completely, but
Yeah,
just, you know, not a wonderful,
cool.
not a bad source, to call up in a way,
No, not at all.
close to.
I
Yeah,
remember,
we have to get together because I live about 6 miles from Emily Dickinson's house. So we've really got to do that.
We do. We have to
Yeah,
have coffee or
we
something.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
I
Or do a reading there. Do a reading at her
include
house.
Oh,
me in
that'd be great.
spirit
Yeah.
there. I would like to be there at least in spirit. Yeah. I was going to say, I remember my first encounter with Maria's book was really early manuscript, and that was at Arojo Ghost Ranch
Mhm.
back in 2011, 2000, something like that. Might have been.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and uh, at that time, the poems were very, very short, and
Yes.
they were very much dealing with the silence that I was experiencing from my dad, who was usually very talkative, but who had gone silent. So
Mm.
the poems were very short and very sort of haiku-esque. It was just like snow, man in snow, tree. It was very, very limited in some ways. And Ruth Ruth had looked at those poems and she's like, "Yeah, I think you need to open these up, Maria." So she really helped me um kind of feel through, I think, what Robin is talking, like when you're dealing with someone in your life who's going through dementia and stuff, you have to peel it open over time. And the first thing that came to me was the silence part, and that's how the poems originally started.
I was particularly taken by the line that mentioned shit at the wall or whatever it was, because I experienced that too, and that really just
Yeah.
so much of the poem of the book was very lyrical, but you also had that other language that was so, tightly connected to the state of dementia,
Hmm.
kinds of things that happen. Um, so I was happy that I was not happy, but it made sense that you brought that in there, and it really completed it for me.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Yes.
I noticed that too. That of course, the language reflecting the decompensation in that way, but also wrote to Maria before this and just shared a couple of stories with her about my own experience around this stuff, and one of the things that I shared is just that often when we're writing about it, maybe because we're trying to do the universal thing, right? We the story of dementia that's about people becoming really beatific,
Mm.
and gentle and kind and simple and childlike and beautiful can be an aspect of what happens. My mother certainly had periods of that. And it's by far the most saleable version of dementia, right? Um, Both in literal terms and in terms of like what is maybe least vulnerable to share, but to share about the shit on the walls, to share about the in my mother's case, the 3 year period of intense cruelty, just to everyone and everything all the time, or the period of intense anxiety, just terror all the time. Um, those things are so much harder to say. Um, and Maria, I love your book so much because it does both. It holds that whole experience, which to me is the only way to do what Ruth was talking about, the going deeper, and really bringing meaning that can actually act in this world for others. And Ruth midwifed my book too. Both of them, really. And more than anything, in my case, I think it was just that I needed to know that there was someone out there who wanted to hear this story other than me. And for a while, Ruth was that person. And that's it, And so Ruth was they say, to writers, have an ideal audience in your mind, have an ideal reader, and write to that person. And Ruth was my ideal reader for
Oh,
both of
that's
these
really
books.
lovely. Yeah, I love it.
So
I think we also shared profound interest in the descent of Inanna and that whole
yes,
story, which I write about obsessively. And
yeah,
um, to me, the most, I don't know, in my life, it has been the most um, interesting and useful story.
yeah.
And again, it's like, oh shit, here it is again. Here it is again.
Here it is again.
So I really love in this one here, you have Erich Kiegel's meat hooks on the wall, so
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and those who know me know that, and Ruth is certainly one of them. She watched this happen, and had to wait for books because of it. But Inanna and Ereshkigal and the hooks, the meat hook that Inanna was hung on, this metal hook through her back, literally hung on, and she said had to rot there as the hero of the story, ostensibly, right? But she wasn't really the hero of the story. These other figures were. But she's hanging there on the metal hook, and then, at a certain point in my life, I actually had to, my spine failed, and I had to have my lumbar spine remade out of titanium. And so those references creep in a lot of times. And so, I thought of it often as the meat hook going from the outside to the inside. Like it's inside now, you know. But this idea of how we have to redo the descent, redo the ascent, redo the walk west, redo, how we just have to keep doing things, um, is certainly part of the heart of being human, I think, and part of the heart of answering that question that I asked in this book. Um, but I also think it's very reflective of dementia, right? Because there are all these repetitions, and everything that you do is then gone very quickly, and you have to do it again and again and again. And sometimes that's peaceful and lovely and beautiful, and sometimes that's brutal and impossible. And yeah, it's handled so beautifully in Maria's book.
Also, the fragmentation in both the books is very interesting. You have these sections called fragments, and I'm very concerned in mine about with the broken and fragmented language of dementia.
Yeah.
So that I thought that was really interesting too.
Well, my dears, I think we're probably getting to closure. If there's are there any other questions before we do?
Just want to, Jasmine, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name probably, but recommend a book called Gilgamesh and Other Poems. I put it in the chat.
Thank
By a
you.
friend of mine named Scott Miners and Mammoth Books. It's in the chat, so
Thank you very much.
you
I
might.
always chase
Very
those
good.
books down.
Yeah, yeah, you're a Gilgamesh freak, and so is he. So you might like it. It's a book of poems.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jessamyn and Maria, for reading. This has been really something. I really have loved hearing you and love you both. And Maria, get well soon. And thank you again, everybody, for being here. And I will try to we'll try to have the recording available next week sometime. So at that point, you can direct people to it who missed friends who missed this.
Great. Well, and Ruth, thank you so much for inviting us and for also using your crone witchery to see how these two books and humans might resonate with each other because boy, were you right. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm so glad that that we got paired, Maria, and also because we're close by.